Should you always kiss on the first date? Should you never buy a girl a drink? Should you always open Indirect? These are the types of questions that I get asked all the time and that I hate the absolute most. These questions with the words always and never in them. Because the answer is very easy to give, but tells you almost nothing about game once given. And in fact, if you're asking these kind of questions, these always never questions, you will forever be stuck at beginner. These types of black and white thinking are the types of things that hold you back from the nuance you really need to become good with women. So in this video, I'm going to share with you why you should almost never use the words always or never in game or in life, and how nuance is the key to real success. The core problem with the words always and never is that the world simply does not work that way. And this was a concept I was introduced to in high school when someone advised me, if you're ever going to guess on a test, one of the best things you can do is cross out any answer that has the word always or never in it. And the reason for this is simply that alwayses and nevers don't often occur in the real world. This is true even when you're talking about controlled scientific experiments, but it's especially true when you're talking about chaotic social environments. Just to fully illustrate this point, I want to do a quick thought experiment. Imagine trying to prove an always or a never. Let's say, for example, you wanted to prove the statement, all swans are white. You could see white swans your entire life from birth all the way to age 95, and then you see one black swan and it's disproven. It doesn't matter how many examples of it can be proven correctly, one single wrong example disproves your whole theory. So you can basically never prove an always or a never. So if always and never are such terrible words to use and to think, why do so many people use them? Well, it's because they're trying to create a simple model of the world. See, as human beings, we're taking in so much information, we're dealing with so many situations, we can't consider everything. We want to simplify so that we can make a practical decision. So we want to create an easier model to understand that allows us to be decisive. And to an extent, that's a good thing. However, it's important that we realize our models are models and they do not completely accurately reflect reality. For example, say you're following a map. You're driving your car and the map says there's a road and you're going to follow it. You drive your actual car and you reach a dead end. Well, the map says there's a road. The real world says there's a dead end. Which you're going to trust, the map or the real world? If you trust the map, you're going to get in an accident, right? The map is not the territory. It's a representation of the real world. It's not the real world. Similarly, let's say you go to a restaurant and you order something off the menu, and then the food comes out and the picture and the food don't look exactly the same. And they certainly don't taste the same. If you were to eat the menu, it doesn't taste anything like your hamburger or your steak or your salad. So again, the menu is not the meal, it's a representation of the meal. As human beings, we need models like this in order to function in the world. If every situation we had to think about every fact, every stimulus, every nuance, and every possibility in order to make a decision, we'd be paralyzed and never take action. And on a practical level, that really would just leave us screwed. Even in the modern world, but especially in the ancient world where we're talking about hunting and life and death situations. So we know that models are fundamentally flawed, but we also know that we need the models in order to function. How do we handle this paradox? Well, there are really two solutions. One is to understand our models so we know where they're useful and where they break down. The second is to have many different models that potentially interact, and we can decide which model is more applicable to the current situation. Quick example of this from science. If you look at physics, a man named Sir Isaac Newton basically explained motion for all practical purposes in most everyday situations. However, his model breaks down as you reach the speed of light. So on a day-to-day level, using Newton's model is probably the right thing to do because it's simple, quick, and it gets the job done. But if you're dealing with something near light, using Newton's model will be drastically wrong. You need to know what the situation you're dealing with is and which model to use. So let's go back to the always never questions that we saw at the start of the video and address them now that we know a little bit more about how to utilize models. Should you always kiss a girl on a first date? No. And here's a little hint. If the question has an always or never in it, the answer is no. You should often kiss a girl on the first date. In fact, you should plan on it in most cases. However, there are a lot of situations where kissing the girl on the first date would be a bad idea. One example would be if you find out that you have a very short time window on the date and you're not going to be able to escalate towards sex on that date. Well, now you're planning to have a second date rather than to escalate, and in fact, pushing the escalation, being too sexual, might decrease your chances of meeting up with the girl again for various reasons. Even time constraints aside, if you're on a date which cannot escalate to sex for a different reason, like for example, the girl is very sexually inexperienced, it's just not going to happen, it may be a good idea not to escalate physically so much on that date for all of the same reasons. Finally, there are some girls you'll run into who simply have an issue with kissing, and they're fine to have sex or do other intimate things, but they simply don't like kissing. As soon as you find that out, you should not kiss them on the first date or even at all until after having sex with them. So in general, should you try and kiss on the first date? Most of the time, yes. But if you have this idea that you're always going to try and kiss on the first date, you're going to mess up as soon as you run into one of these situations where you're going to be going for a second date rather than for taking the girl home on the first date. You're also going to mess up as soon as you have a situation where the girl just is not kiss positive. So what you should have instead is 2 models or possibly even 3. You should have 1 model for a date that can lead to sex, another model for a date that can't lead to sex, and a 3rd model for when you have tried or led to a kiss and seen some negativity and you need to adjust. That nuance is going to dramatically increase your results. Next question, should you never buy a girl a drink? Now this idea of not buying a girl a drink comes from the idea of not supplicating, not bending over backwards or being too needy for the girl early on in the interaction. And certainly if you walk up to a girl and her first thing is she's like, buy me a drink. If you end up buying her a drink in order to talk to her as like, I'm not good enough to talk to you other than buying this drink, that could come off as low value. You could end up just spending a lot of money on drinks and not getting anywhere. However, there are lots of situations where buying a girl a drink is actually a very good idea. Let's say you've been talking to a girl for 30, 40 minutes, things are going really well, and you would just like a natural excuse to move things forward, to maybe move her away from her friends so you can have alone time with her. Taking her to the bar, getting a drink with her in that situation is a very, very good idea. Also, a lot of girls have an idea in their head of if they meet a guy out, have drinks with him and go home with him, that's normal. But you take the drinks out, it feels like it's not fitting in with their expectation for the night. They may have more resistance around that. Finally, if it seems like you really like the girl and want to have a good time with her, and you just refuse to get a drink with her for some reason, you may come off as cheap or having an agenda or weird, and that can put her off. So again, this idea of should you never buy a girl a drink, there is a time to not buy a girl a drink for sure, but there are lots of times when it would make sense to buy a girl a drink. And if you're 100% one or 100% the other, you're going to be wrong a lot. And the last of the 3 questions is, should you always open indirect? I do personally like indirect openers because when you open very direct, oftentimes the girl has to make a snap decision, and if she doesn't immediately like you, you're going to get, I have a boyfriend or some other negative response. Whereas if you open indirect, have a little more time to convey your value and show her how cool you are, you're more likely to get a positive response later. So I do tend to, as an advanced guy, favor indirect opening over direct opening. But there are a lot of situations where I would switch this. Number 1, if you're a beginner and have a hard time making it man to woman, oftentimes opening direct can get you right through your sticking point. And even though you will take some rejections, it may overall be way better for your percentages and success. Number 2, there are some situations where it's unavoidable to show interest, and so you may as well just own your interest. Another situation would be if there's no way to hide your intention anyway. So let's say you had to wade through a crowd and go way out of your way to talk to a girl. Well, she already knows you came to see her. She already knows you're interested. Trying to hide your intention just looks disingenuous. A third one would be, let's say that before the open, you actually made eye contact with the girl and she showed some interest. Oftentimes in that case, going not only direct but super direct can actually lead to almost immediate escalation in the interaction, and it's well worth doing. So again, should you always open indirect? No. Even though that is my preferred type of opener in general, there are plenty of cases where a different type of opener is way better, and adapting to these different models for different situations will dramatically increase your results. So now that we've established the importance of using models correctly, and we've shown that always and never are pretty much horrible words, what should we do on a practical level? Well, first of all, if you catch yourself using the word always or never, stop and think. Don't just go in that black and white direction. Don't just simplify things out of laziness, and don't oversimplify them. Understand that there is nuance in the world, and you want to capture that nuance if you ever want to reach a high level in anything. And with this point, I would urge you to draw a distinction in your game between action time and thinking time. When you're in field, basically trust the model you have and act decisively. When you're out of field thinking about what happened and what you plan to do next time, that's when you want to really go deep. That's when you want to think, was my model accurate and useful? Should I have done something different next time? Are there factors I haven't considered? Those types of thinking that may not lead to an immediate decision, right? So in the situation, you need to do your best and be decisive. Out of the situation, you want to try and be as theoretically optimal as possible. Next, to the extent that you need to use models to function, try and understand the models you're using and their limits, and then trust your own judgment. Your judgment and experience will be better than the model as you get better and better at any skill set. Finally, try not to rely on black and white rules in life. Try and understand the why, and also almost never use the words always and never.